Hello everyone, I am Özlem Öztürk and I am studying at Osman Gazi University. I hope you are all fine. Today I will talk about translanguaging in education, principles, implications and challenges, which is written by Ofelia, García and Li Wei. So my video will last about 20 minutes. So let me share my context with you. Today, I will talk about translanguaging as pedagogy. Then I will move on implications of translanguaging for teacher education. Then I will talk about a translanguaging project in New York State for educators. Then I will talk about challenges for translanguaging and education. The first challenge is the challenge of teaching to do translanguaging. And the second challenge is the challenge of using translanguaging in assessment. And the final part is conclusion. So let's get started with the first one. Translanguaging as pedagogy, principles and strategies. Translanguaging is the fluidity of languages in an individual's linguistic repertoire. And in other words, translanguaging is the use of different languages together. So teachers use translanguaging to enable students to make meaning and learn. And it is in the creative and critical moments of translanguaging that actions are transformed. And there is a short video in here. Let's watch this.
One day, I told my mom that I want to do something like this. Mamma, kan jeg være så snill å få litt candy? Og så en Coca-Cola. Og etter det kan ikke vi gå til the lake and the park. Og så kan vi se på the earth. And then my mom said, what? We're messing it up. And then I it.
By looking this video, we can say that the girl in the video starts her speech by talking English, then she suddenly switches her language to her mother language. And in the later part of the video, she used some English vocabulary in her speech. And so this is an example of translanguaging. So let's continue with the different ways in which translanguaging is used. And there is a table in here to show goals and possible strategies. While using translanguaging in our classrooms, teachers use different strategies to different goals. And there are 7 goals in here. And each of the goals needs some strategies. For example, in the first one, differentiate and adapt. Teachers should realize that there are different types of students in their classrooms. So these students can be either monolingual or bilingual or even emergent bilingual. So teachers should detect those students, and teachers can translate some sentences, some words to their languages. And let's continue with the goals. Why we use translanguaging in our classrooms? According to a definition by García and Cano, translanguaging is a process by which students and teachers engage in complex discursive practices. And there are goals in here. These goals relate different things. For example, number 1, second, and the third goals related to communicating and appropriating knowledge. Number 4 and 5th goal relate to developing new language practices and sustaining old ones. And number 6 and 7 goal relate to giving voice and shaping new sociopolitical realities by interrogating linguistic inequality. And let's continue with the strategies. The translanguaging strategies corresponded to 3 categories. These categories are teachers' attentiveness to meaning making. The second category is teachers use and design classroom resources for translanguaging. And the third one is teacher design of curriculum and classroom structures for translanguaging. So let's continue with the second part. Implications of translanguaging for teacher education. All teachers in the 21st century need to be prepared to be bilingual teachers in their translanguaging classrooms. But most teachers think that afterwards, and teachers learn little about the children's complex dynamic language practices. So what should teachers do to manage that? Teachers need to be able to observe bilingual children closely and describe them as they are engaged in meaningful learning activities and interacting in different settings. Also, teachers need to be aware of language diversity, and teachers need to see their students as people, not just numbers. Also, teachers need to develop a critical socio-political consciousness. And lastly, teachers need to act on all this information by constructing curricula and pedagogies. So there is an activity in here, translanguaging card sort activity. This activity is developed by García. The aim of this activity is to make teachers aware of the potential of the translanguaging. And this photograph is the activity. And there is examples. There are examples in here. The first example is the true examples. The second category is non-correct examples. In the correct examples, teachers can give 2 or 3K vocabulary and ask the students to translate those vocabularies into their own language. Also, teachers can give songs, pictures, and this kind of assignments or works can benefit to students. Also, there are some examples that is not correct. Teachers should not translate every sentences or every words, and word for word translation is wrong. So let's continue with the third part, a translanguaging project in New York State. And this project makes up the collaboration of the State University of New York and New York State Initiative on Emergent Bilinguals. And according to this project breaks away the roughness of program structures. And this project focuses on carving out spaces within schools to build on the complex and fluid ways. And there are 3 principles in here. The first principle is the creative emergence of individual language practices. And the second principle is the dynamics of bilingualism. And the third principle is the dynamic process of teaching and learning emergent bilinguals. So, according to this vision, bilingualism is the desired norm for all American students. And bilingual development is always emergent, continuous, never-ending, and shaped by relationships with people, texts, and situations. So this project correlates with traditional views. And there are some principles that is close to debate, that is non-negotiable principles. There are 2 principles in here. The first principle is bilingualism has to be used as a resource in education. And the most important thing in here, the entire linguistic repertoire of bilingual children is used flexibly and strategically. And the second principle is support of a multilingual ecology for the whole school. And the most important thing is in here, the entire range of language practices of children and families are evident in the school's textual landscapes. These landscapes are inside throughout the school, in text, in the library, in the classrooms. So, and there are 4 examples and a recommendation part in here. The first example is a multilingual bulletin board in one of the schools. One of the school create a bulletin board, and in this bulletin board, the schools shows some vocabularies in some other languages, and the same meaning with welcome. And in below, the school used basic sentences in English forms and other language forms. So by doing that, the parents will be more welcomed in there. So the second example is one of the school sent the announcement to the parents in their own languages. So this is a second example of this. So let's continue with the third example. Chart of class roles. In one class, they create a class rules and they show the English version and their own language version. And this means the English version and the Spanish version. But it is important that the rules in Spanish follows a different order and emphasize different things. And lastly, the fourth example is students annotated texts. Teachers also had multilingual texts readily available and encourage students to find text at home or on the internet and bring them to class. And there is a photograph in here. By looking this photograph, we can see that the children find this document in his or her home, and he or she translates some words to their to her or his own language. So, and there is a recommendation part in here. Recommendations were developed by Sarah Hassan. Sarah Hassan gave recommendations both teachers and students. And these are some recommendations if you want to check. And let's continue. If you want to learn more about this project, you can visit the actual website of this project, or you can visit the YouTube channel of this project. And there are 5 videos that related to our topic. The suggestions of teachers, the suggestions and practices of these translanguaging classrooms. So let's continue with the fourth part, challenges for translanguaging and education, teaching to do and assessment. There are 2 main challenges in here. The first challenge is the challenge of teaching to do translanguaging. And the second challenge is the challenge of using translanguaging in assessment. So let's start with the first one. The challenge of teaching to do translanguaging. Translanguaging as pedagogy is being increasingly used by teachers, but it is rare to find schooling situations. And the students who design their own text will be encouraged in the classroom. So this translanguaging text could then serve as counter text and can be used to interrogate language practices. Also, teachers, what should teachers do? Teachers need to stop penalizing students. Also, teachers would authorize the translanguaging norm of bilingual communities, and teachers need to give equal value to the standard norm in academic context. Also, teachers need to take into account the tension of the different meaning-making signs. And let's continue with the second challenge, the challenge of using translanguaging in assessment. In assessment, the main thing in here is to improve the education of students. And assessments should help teachers make meaningful instructional decisions. And also, standardized assessments are usually administered in one language only. This is troubling for bilingual students. And in a few cases, when multilingual summative assessments are available, students are required to make a choice of language, and the teachers give them 2 exam papers. The first one is in the dominant language. The second one is the other exam paper is in the home language of the student. But the responses are valid only in one language. And this is a reflection of monoglossic view of bilingualism. So, translanguaging were not accepted. If it were accepted, standardized assessments would be done in translanguaged ways, using the advanced adaptive technologies. In these translanguaged mode assessments, questions would be posed in many languages, and students would be free to reply whatever multilingual, multimodal practices they are. And teachers, what should teachers do? Teachers need to engage students in translanguaging events. And also, teachers need to assess the students' languaging and knowledge making, regardless of language form. And the conclusion part. The conclusion part summarizes whole book. And in this book, translanguaging extends our traditional definitions of language and bilingualism. Also, translanguaging makes visible the different histories, different identities, different heritages, and ideologies of the multilingual language users. Also, the practice of translanguaging is both based on a transsemiotic system and produce trans spaces. And people increasingly live their lives in more than one places. This is the result of migration. And also a translanguaging lens enables us to break traditional boundaries. And translanguaging enables us to imagine new ways of being and languaging. So these are my references. Before coming to end, I want to summarize the learnings that we learned today. Firstly, we understand translanguaging. Also, we talk about our previous weeks, but in this week we summarize the translanguaging. Translanguaging is the fluidity of languages in an individual's linguistic repertoire. In other words, translanguaging is the use of different languages together. And then the second important thing in here that all teachers in the 21st century need to be prepared for these translanguaging classrooms, but most teachers think that afterwards. And teachers doesn't realize the children's complex and dynamic language practices. And there are suggestions in here. If we want to be a good teachers, we must carry about those recommendations. And also, there is a project in here, the collaboration of the University of New York and New York State Initiative on Emergent Bilinguals. In this project, there are examples in here. If you want to use your English classes in the future, you can use this type of examples, or you can develop these examples according to your experiences. And also there are recommendation parts in here. You can read those recommendations and realize that you can use translanguaging in classes by following the recommendations, by understanding the recommendations. Also, there are two challenges in here, according to this theory: the challenge of teaching to do translanguaging and the challenge of using translanguaging in assessment. And in the first one, teaching to do translanguaging, the challenge of teaching to do translanguaging, there are some suggestions, like students can encourage when they are design their own text, or teachers stop penalizing students. These suggestions help teachers to debate the debate, to debate the challenge. So the second challenge is the challenge of using translanguaging in assessment. In this example, there are some possible recommendations in here. Teachers need to engage students in translanguaging events. By following these suggestions, teachers can use the translanguaging in their classes. And these are all I want to say. Thank you very much for listening to me. If you have any questions, you can directly ask me, or you can send me email. Thank you very much for listening to me. Have a nice day. See you later. Goodbye.